November 19th, 1944, 06:42 in the morning. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers peered through his periscope inside an M4 Sherman near Bourg-Ultraf, France, tracking German anti-tank guns across frozen fields while blood-soaked bandages held together what remained of his shattered left leg. He was 26 years old, 13 days in combat, 1 Silver Star for bravery. That month, the 761st Tank Battalion had already lost 14 tanks, 24 men dead, 81 wounded. The killing showed no sign of stopping. Rivers was half Cherokee, born in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. He had worked the railroad before the war. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 190 pounds. The Army had assigned him to Company A of the 761st Tank Battalion in 1942. They called themselves the Black Panthers. Their motto was simple: come out fighting. Most white officers in the Army believed black soldiers could not operate tanks. Colonel Perry Miles had written that the main use of Negroes in future wars should be labor organizations. Even George Patton had written to his wife that a colored soldier could not think fast enough to fight in armor. The 761st trained for 2 years at Camp Hood, Texas. White tank battalions trained for 6 months. The Army wanted to be certain these men could handle the machinery before sending them to die. The battalion landed at Omaha Beach on October 10, 1944. General Patton requested them personally for his Third Army. He stood on an armored car and addressed the 676 black enlisted men and 30 black officers. He told them they were the first Negro tankers to fight in American history. He told them he did not care what color they were, as long as they went up there and killed Germans. He told them their race was watching. He told them not to let him down. Company A entered combat on November 7th near Vic-sur-Seille. The fighting was brutal from the first engagement. German mortars and rifle fire pinned down infantry in roadside ditches. Rivers was positioned in the lead tank when a fallen tree and mines blocked the narrow road. He dismounted under small arms fire and removed the roadblock by hand. The action earned him the Silver Star, the first awarded to the 761st. The Sherman tank was reliable and easy to repair. It was also a death trap. The 75mm gun could not penetrate German Panther frontal armor beyond 500 yards. Panthers could spot Shermans from 1,200 yards and destroy them with a single shot. German crews called American tankers Ronsons. They lit the first time. In 3 weeks of combat, Company A lost 23 Shermans. 11 loaders died in those burning hulls. Rivers knew the mathematics. German tanks fired first. German tanks hit first. American crews died first. On November 16th, Company A advanced toward the town of Gebling. Rivers commanded the lead tank. At a railroad crossing just outside town, the Sherman hit a mine. The explosion sent shrapnel through the turret floor and sliced Rivers' left leg to the bone. The medic offered morphine. Rivers refused. Captain David Williams ordered evacuation. Rivers refused. He said the company would need him. He said a couple days would not make any difference. He took command of another Sherman and advanced into Gebling the next day. Gangrene was eating through his leg, and Rivers still would not leave his tank. Take a second to hit like. It really does help us share stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't. Back to Rivers. The wound festered. By November 18th, infection had spread through the damaged tissue. A medic inspected the swollen leg and shouted that Rivers had gangrene. Williams again ordered evacuation. Rivers looked at his captain and said the next push would be tough. He said another 2 days would not matter. German guns opened fire before Williams could respond. The conversation ended there. At dawn on November 19th, Rivers led Company A toward Bourg-Ultraf. German anti-tank positions concealed beyond hedgerows opened fire immediately. 2 Black Panther tanks exploded within seconds. Williams ordered his remaining Shermans to withdraw and take cover. Rivers had spotted the enemy guns. He radioed 4 words that would be remembered for 53 years. And then the Germans fired again. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated on April 1st, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The Army housed them in segregated quarters, a mile from the front gate on rutted dirt roads. They lived in canvas tents next to the sewage treatment facility. White tank battalions trained on paved streets near the main buildings. Rivers arrived at Camp Claiborne in March 1942. He was assigned to Able Company. The men trained on M5 Stuart light tanks, armed with 37mm cannons. They learned to maneuver and maintain the vehicles. They learned to mount and dismount under fire. They learned to operate the radios and coordinate with infantry. Captain Charles Calvert took notice of Rivers during training exercises. Calvert promoted him to sergeant. In August 1942, the battalion moved to Camp Livingston for combat maneuvers. They performed as well as white tank battalions. When they returned to Camp Claiborne in September, their morale was high. It did not last. Local civilians hurled racist insults when the men went into town. White officers at the camp treated them as laborers, not soldiers. The contradiction was inescapable. They were training to fight fascism in Europe while living under Jim Crow in Louisiana. The battalion moved to Camp Hood, Texas, in September 1943. They were upgraded to M4 Sherman medium tanks, equipped with 75mm main guns. Rivers and his crew trained extensively on the new vehicles. They practiced gunnery at moving targets. They rehearsed formation attacks. They drilled on tank infantry coordination until every movement became automatic. White tank crews trained for 6 months and shipped out. The 761st trained for 2 years. Army commanders needed proof that black men could handle armored warfare. On June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, the battalion received deployment orders. They boarded the British troop carrier Esperance Bay in New York on August 27th. The 10-day voyage to England was uneventful. In Britain, they were equipped with upgraded M4A3 Shermans, mounting 76mm cannons. The improved gun gave them better penetration against German armor. It still was not enough. The battalion crossed the English Channel and landed at Omaha Beach on October 10th. They drove inland across 400 miles of French countryside in 6 days. General Patton assigned them to the 26th Infantry Division. They were attached to the 104th Infantry Regiment. Their mission was to break through German defensive positions, protecting the Saar industrial region. The Siegfried Line fortifications had stopped multiple American advances. Company A rolled into combat on November 7th near Morville-les-Vicq. The fighting was immediate and savage. German forces had prepared defensive positions in the dense forests. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Anti-tank guns were dug in behind hedgerows. Self-propelled artillery could strike from concealed positions and withdraw before American gunners acquired targets. Rivers commanded the lead Sherman in most engagements. On November 8th, a German roadblock stopped the column outside Vic-sur-Seille. Enemy mortars began dropping rounds on stranded infantry. Rivers dismounted from his tank and removed the obstacle while small arms fire erupted around him. The roadblock cleared. The advance continued. Captain Williams recommended Rivers for the Silver Star. Between November 8th and November 15th, Company A fought through Chateau Celine and surrounding villages. They knocked out German machine gun positions. They destroyed enemy supply trucks. They supported infantry assaults against fortified buildings. The 761st was proving what every white officer had doubted. Black tankers could fight. Black tankers could win. But the cost was mounting. 14 tanks evacuated or destroyed. 24 men dead. 81 wounded. The battalion had been in continuous combat for 9 days. There was no rotation to rear areas. There were no replacement crews arriving. The men who started the fight would have to finish it. On November 16th at dawn, Company A received orders to assault Giebling. The town sat on high ground overlooking the approach roads. German forces held strong defensive positions. Intelligence reported Panther tanks and anti-tank guns covering all routes into the village. Rivers prepared his crew. He checked ammunition loads. He verified radio frequencies. He studied the maps showing their route. At 0600 hours, the Shermans moved out in formation. Rivers commanded the lead tank. The morning was cold. Frost covered the fields. The column approached Giebling along a narrow road flanked by hedgerows. At 0630, they reached a railroad crossing just outside town. Rivers' Sherman rolled onto the tracks. The mine detonated beneath the hull. The explosion tore through the Sherman's floor plating. Shrapnel ripped upward through the turret basket. Rivers was standing in the tank commander's position when jagged metal fragments sliced through his left leg. The blast drove steel splinters deep into muscle and shattered bone. Blood poured into his boot. The crew bailed out. They dragged Rivers from the turret and laid him beside the disabled tank. The medic cut away Rivers' pant leg and exposed the wound. Bone gleamed white through torn flesh. The bleeding was severe, but not arterial. The medic prepared a morphine syringe. Rivers pushed it away. He needed to stay conscious. He needed to command. Captain Williams reached the scene within minutes. He assessed the damage to Rivers' leg and immediately ordered evacuation to the aid station. Rivers refused the order. He told Williams that Company A would need every experienced tank commander for the assault on Gebling. He said 2 days would not make any difference. Williams argued. Rivers did not move. The medic bandaged the wound as tightly as possible. Rivers could not put weight on the leg. 2 crew members helped him walk to another Sherman. He climbed onto the hull and pulled himself into the commander's position. The pain was extraordinary. Rivers ignored it. At 0700 hours, Company A resumed the advance into Gebling. The Germans had prepared defensive positions throughout the town. Anti-tank guns covered the main street. Machine gun nests protected every intersection. Panzer grenadiers waited in fortified buildings with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. The Shermans pushed forward through concentrated fire. Rivers directed his tank's 76mm gun at enemy positions. They knocked out a machine gun nest at 200 yards. They destroyed a German supply truck attempting to evacuate. The battle for Gebling lasted 4 hours. Company A lost 2 more Shermans to anti-tank fire. 3 crew members were killed. 5 were wounded. But by 1100 hours on November 17th, American forces controlled the town. Rivers had commanded his tank throughout the entire engagement. He had not requested relief. He had not mentioned his leg. That evening, Williams found Rivers in his tank. The bandages were soaked through with blood and fluid. The leg had swollen to twice its normal size. Rivers' face was pale. Sweat covered his forehead despite the November cold. Williams again ordered evacuation. Rivers again refused. He said the Germans would counterattack. He said Company A needed experienced commanders. November 18th brought no relief. Company A held defensive positions around Gebling. German artillery pounded their positions throughout the day. Rivers remained in his tank. He coordinated with infantry units. He adjusted fire missions. He monitored radio traffic for signs of enemy movement. The infection in his leg was spreading. Dark streaks extended up from the wound site. The flesh around the injury had turned gray. At 1500 hours on November 18th, Williams brought a medic to inspect Rivers' leg. The medic unwrapped the bandages. The smell was unmistakable. Gangrene had set in. The tissue was dying. Without immediate treatment, Rivers would lose the leg. Without evacuation, he would die. The medic told Williams that Rivers needed surgery within hours, or the infection would kill him. Williams ordered Rivers to be evacuated immediately. Rivers responded that the next push would be tough. He said another 2 days would make no difference. German artillery interrupted the conversation. Shells began impacting around Company A's positions. Williams took cover. When the barrage ended, Rivers was back in his tank checking ammunition counts. The 761st had been in combat for 12 days. They had traveled from Vic-sur-Seille through Château-Salins to Gebling. They had knocked out dozens of German positions. They had supported multiple infantry assaults. They had lost 16 tanks. 28 men were dead. 93 were wounded. The battalion was exhausted, but General Patton needed them to continue the advance. On November 19th, at 0500 hours, Company A received orders to attack Borgaltroff. German intelligence indicated heavy defensive preparations. Panther tanks, anti-tank guns, fortified positions on high ground overlooking the approach roads. It would be the toughest fight yet. Rivers prepared his crew. He loaded extra ammunition. He verified his radio was functioning. His left leg no longer responded to commands. He could not feel anything below the knee. At 0530 on November 19th, Rivers climbed into his Sherman for the last time. The sky was still dark. Frost covered the tank's armor. Rivers could not walk without assistance. 2 crew members lifted him onto the hull. He pulled himself into the commander's position. The infected leg hung useless in the turret. The smell of rotting tissue filled the confined space. Company A formed up in attack formation. 7 Shermans remained operational. Rivers commanded the lead tank. Intelligence reports indicated German forces had established defensive positions on high ground beyond Borgaltroff. Panther tanks were dug in hull down behind earthworks. Anti-tank guns covered the approach roads. Observation posts had clear fields of fire across open terrain. At 0600 hours, the column moved out. Visibility was poor. Morning fog clung to the ground. The Shermans advanced slowly along the narrow road toward Borgaltroff. Rivers scanned the terrain through his periscope. He could see hedgerows on both sides. Perfect ambush positions. The hair on his neck stood up. At 0642, German guns opened fire. The first round struck a Sherman 200 yards behind Rivers. The tank exploded. Burning fuel ignited the ammunition. A second Sherman took a direct hit to the turret. The crew bailed out. 3 men were on fire. Anti-tank rounds began impacting all around Company A's position. The Germans had them zeroed in. Rivers identified muzzle flashes from concealed positions beyond the hedgerows. At least 3 anti-tank guns, possibly Panthers holed down behind earthworks. He could see the defensive layout now. The Germans had created an interlocking kill zone. Any Sherman that advanced would be destroyed from multiple angles. Any tank that remained stationary would be bracketed by artillery. Williams assessed the tactical situation. Company A was caught in a prepared ambush. 7 operational tanks against superior German armor and dug-in anti-tank guns. The smart decision was withdrawal. Williams radioed his tank commanders to pull back and take cover behind the nearest ridgeline. The Shermans began reversing. Rivers transmitted on the company radio frequency. His voice was calm. He reported that he had visual contact on enemy positions. He stated that he would engage the anti-tank guns to cover the company's withdrawal. Another Sherman moved up beside Rivers' tank. Together, they would provide covering fire. The 2 Shermans advanced toward the German positions. Rivers directed his gunner at the nearest anti-tank gun. The 76mm cannon fired. The German position disappeared in an explosion of earth and metal. The 2nd Sherman engaged another target. Company A's remaining tanks withdrew behind cover. German gunners shifted fire to Rivers' Sherman. High explosive rounds began impacting around the tank. Rivers continued directing fire. His gunner destroyed a 2nd anti-tank gun. The radio crackled with Williams ordering Rivers to withdraw immediately. Rivers did not respond. He was focused on the 3rd anti-tank position. The German gunners found their range. 2 high-explosive shells struck Rivers' Sherman in rapid succession. The first round penetrated the turret face. The second hit the hull. Both shells detonated inside the tank. The explosion killed Rivers instantly. The blast threw the other crew members from the turret. All 3 survived with severe wounds. The 2nd Sherman continued firing until its ammunition ran low. Then, it withdrew. The German anti-tank guns shifted fire to other targets. By 07:15, Company A had pulled back to defensive positions. They had lost 3 tanks in the engagement. 4 men were dead. Rivers was among them. Captain Williams reached the burning Sherman at 0800 hours after German fire slackened. Rivers' body remained in the commander's position. Williams had served with Rivers since Camp Claiborne. He had watched Rivers train for 2 years. He had seen Rivers earn the Silver Star on November 8th. He had watched Rivers refuse evacuation 3 times with a shattered leg. He had heard Rivers' final radio transmission. Williams wrote the Medal of Honor recommendation that night. He documented Rivers' actions from November 16th through November 19th. He described the refusal to evacuate despite severe wounds. He detailed the final engagement at Borgel Trough. He noted that Rivers had sacrificed himself to save his company. Williams submitted the paperwork on November 20th, 1944. He expected the Army would act quickly. The action was obvious. The heroism was undeniable. The recommendation was clear. Williams was wrong about the Army's response. The paperwork disappeared into the military bureaucracy. No Medal of Honor was awarded. No investigation was conducted. Rivers received the Silver Star and Purple Heart posthumously. Nothing more. The 761st Tank Battalion continued fighting after Rivers died. They had no time to mourn. German forces were preparing a massive counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest. On December 16, 1944, 3 German armies smashed through American lines in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. The 761st was rushed north to help stem the breakthrough. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastogne. German forces had cut all roads into the town. Supplies were running critically low. Casualties were mounting. General Patton ordered his 3rd Army to break through and relieve the encirclement. The 761st Tank Battalion spearheaded the attack. The fighting around Bastogne was savage. Temperatures dropped below 0. Snow covered the battlefield. German forces fought desperately to hold their positions. Panther and Tiger tanks dominated the frozen fields. The 761st attacked through blizzard conditions. They lost 9 tanks in 2 days of combat near the town of Tillet, but they broke through. Bastogne was relieved on December 26th. The battalion pushed east through January and February of 1945. They fought through the Siegfried Line fortifications. They crossed into Germany in March. They liberated concentration camps. They met Soviet forces in Austria on April 26th. By May 8th, when Germany surrendered, the 761st had been in continuous combat for 183 days. The statistics told the story. 3 officers and 31 enlisted men killed in action. 22 officers and 180 enlisted men wounded. 71 tanks destroyed or evacuated. The battalion had suffered approximately 50% casualties. They had inflicted over 130,000 casualties on German forces. They had liberated 30 towns across 6 countries. Individual soldiers earned 391 decorations for heroism, 7 silver stars, including Rivers, 56 bronze stars, 246 Purple Hearts. 8 black enlisted men received battlefield commissions. The battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation in 1978 for extraordinary gallantry during their 183 days of combat. But no medals of honor were awarded. Not to Rivers, not to any member of the 761st, not to any black soldier who served in World War II. The battalion returned to the United States in 1946. There were no parades. There were no celebrations. They were still black soldiers in a segregated army, serving a segregated nation. Many could not find jobs. Many faced violence from white civilians who resented their service. The contradiction remained. They had fought fascism abroad. They returned to Jim Crow at home. Rivers was buried in the Lorraine American Cemetery in Saint-Avold, France, 5,000 miles from his family in Oklahoma. His sister received notification of his death. She received his Silver Star. She received his Purple Heart. She received a folded American flag. She did not receive a Medal of Honor. Captain Williams's recommendation was filed somewhere in the War Department bureaucracy. No investigation was conducted. No review board examined the case. The paperwork simply disappeared. This was not unusual. The military awarded 433 Medals of Honor for actions during World War II. Not one went to a black American soldier. Over 1 million black Americans served in the armed forces during the war. 0 received the nation's highest military honor. The pattern was systematic. Black soldiers who performed extraordinary acts of valor received Distinguished Service Crosses or Silver Stars. White soldiers who performed similar actions received Medals of Honor. The disparity was documented in unit records. It was visible in award statistics. It was undeniable to anyone who examined the evidence. But nobody in authority examined the evidence. Rivers' story faded from public memory. The 761st Tank Battalion was deactivated. Veterans scattered across the country. Some wrote memoirs, some gave interviews, some tried to ensure their service would be remembered. Most just tried to rebuild their lives in a nation that had not wanted them to fight in the first place. Decades passed. Rivers remained in his grave in France. His Medal of Honor recommendation remained buried in military archives. His family grew older. His sisters kept his Silver Star and Purple Heart in a drawer. They told their children about Uncle Reuben, who died in the war. They did not mention that his country had refused to fully honor his sacrifice. By 1990, nearly 50 years had passed since Rivers died at Borgeltroff. Most of his fellow soldiers were dead. Most Americans had never heard of the 761st Tank Battalion. Most had never heard of Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. History had forgotten them. Then a professor at Shaw University began asking questions. In 1993, the United States Army commissioned Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, to conduct a comprehensive study. The research team was tasked with determining if racial disparity existed in the Medal of Honor selection process during World War II. The Army provided access to military archives. The researchers were given authority to examine award recommendations, combat records, and unit histories. The Shaw University team spent months reviewing files. They examined every Distinguished Service Cross awarded to black soldiers during the war. They compared those citations with Medal of Honor citations awarded to white soldiers. They analyzed the language used in recommendations. They studied the approval process. They documented the chain of command reviews. The findings were damning. The study found no explicit official documentation stating that black soldiers should be denied Medals of Honor. But the pattern was undeniable. Black soldiers who performed extraordinary acts of valor received lower-level awards. White soldiers who performed similar or lesser actions received Medals of Honor. The disparity could not be explained by differences in combat effectiveness or heroism. The only variable was race. The study concluded that systematic racial discrimination had prevented black soldiers from receiving proper recognition. The discrimination was embedded in the military culture of the 1940s. It was reinforced by segregated units and racist attitudes among white officers. It was perpetuated by review boards that consciously or unconsciously devalued black soldiers' contributions. The research team identified 10 black soldiers whose Distinguished Service Crosses should be upgraded to Medals of Honor. They documented each case extensively. They provided combat records. They included witness statements. They compared the actions to Medal of Honor citations awarded to white soldiers for similar conduct. The Army reviewed the Shaw University recommendations. A special board examined each case. They verified the combat records. They confirmed the witness statements. They compared the actions to establish Medal of Honor standards. 7 cases met every criterion. The board recommended upgrading all 7 Distinguished Service Crosses to Medals of Honor. The 7 men were Staff Sergeant Edward Carter, Jr., First Lieutenant John Fox, Private First Class Willie James, Jr., Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, First Lieutenant Charles Thomas, Private George Watson, First Lieutenant Vernon Baker. All had performed extraordinary acts of valor. All had been denied proper recognition because of their race. 6 were dead. Only Vernon Baker remained alive. There was a procedural problem. Federal law established a time limit for awarding military medals. That deadline had expired decades earlier. The Army could not legally present Medals of Honor for actions in World War II without congressional authorization. The case required legislation. In October 1996, Congress passed special legislation. The bill authorized the President to award Medals of Honor to the 7 black soldiers, despite the expired time limit. Similar waivers had been granted before for other overlooked recipients. President Bill Clinton signed the legislation. A ceremony was scheduled for January 13, 1997. The Army contacted the families of the 6 deceased recipients. Rivers' oldest sister was located in Oklahoma. She was 83 years old. She had kept her brother's Silver Star and Purple Heart for 52 years. She had never understood why he did not receive the Medal of Honor. Captain Williams had told her that Reuben deserved the nation's highest award. She had believed the Army would eventually recognize his sacrifice. Vernon Baker was contacted at his home in Idaho. He was 77 years old. He had served as a lieutenant in the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy. He had single-handedly destroyed multiple German positions during an assault on Castle Agonulfi in April 1945. He had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. He had never received the Medal of Honor. He had spent 50 years wondering why. The White House prepared for the ceremony. President Clinton would personally present each medal. The families would attend. Media would cover the event. After 52 years, the nation would finally acknowledge what it had denied. 7 black soldiers would receive the recognition they had earned in combat. 6 families would receive medals their loved ones never held. 1 survivor would finally have his valor properly honored. But the ceremony would also acknowledge something darker. It would confirm that the United States military had systematically discriminated against black soldiers. It would document that heroism had been judged by skin color. It would prove that justice had been denied for half a century. The medals would honor the recipients. They would also indict the system that had failed them. On January 12, 1997, Vernon Baker prepared to travel to Washington. He would be the only living recipient at the ceremony. He would represent all 7 men. He would accept his medal in person. He would watch as 6 families received medals their fathers and brothers and sons had never known they deserved. On January 13, 1997, at 11:12 in the morning, President Bill Clinton stood in the East Room of the White House before an audience of military officials, Medal of Honor recipients, and the families of 7 black soldiers. Secretary of Defense William Perry sat in the front row. Secretary of the Army Togo West was present. General John Shalakashvili, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, attended in full dress uniform. Retired General Colin Powell sat among the guests. Vernon Baker wore his dress uniform. His chest displayed the Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart he had earned in Italy. He sat with the families of the 6 other recipients. Rivers' sister sat with her children and grandchildren. She held a photograph of Reuben in his tank commander uniform. The photograph was 53 years old. Clinton addressed the audience. He acknowledged that the nation had made a pledge after World War II to correct cases where Medals of Honor were deserved but not awarded. He stated that America was honoring that pledge today. He noted that these 7 men had been prepared to sacrifice everything for freedom, even though freedom's fullness was denied to them. He said that now and forever, the truth would be known about these African Americans who gave so much that the rest of us might be free. The president called each name individually: Staff Sergeant Edward Carter Jr., First Lieutenant John Fox, Private First Class Willie James Jr., Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, First Lieutenant Charles Thomas, Private George Watson, First Lieutenant Vernon Baker. For each of the 6 deceased recipients, family members came forward to receive the medal. Clinton read the citations. He described the actions that had earned the award. He presented the medals to widows, sisters, sons, and daughters. Rivers' citation was read aloud. It documented his actions from November 16th through November 19th, 1944. It described how his tank hit a mine and his leg was slashed to the bone. It noted that he declined morphine and refused evacuation. It explained that he took command of another tank and advanced with his company. It detailed how he repeatedly refused evacuation and continued directing his tank's fire. It described the final engagement at WWII, when he opened fire on enemy positions to cover his company's withdrawal. It stated that his tank was hit and he was killed while providing covering fire. Rivers' sister accepted the Medal of Honor on behalf of her brother. She was crying. Her hands shook as she held the medal. 53 years earlier, she had received a telegram informing her that Reuben was dead. 53 years earlier, Captain Williams had written that her brother deserved the nation's highest honor. She had waited more than half a century to see that promise fulfilled. Vernon Baker was the final recipient called. He walked to the front of the room. Clinton read Baker's citation, describing his actions at Castle Agnolfi on April 5, 1945. Baker had destroyed multiple enemy positions single-handedly while under intense fire. He had led his men through a minefield. He had demonstrated extraordinary heroism throughout 12 hours of continuous combat. Clinton presented the Medal of Honor. Baker accepted it with tears in his eyes. Baker spoke briefly after the ceremony. He said the only thing he could say to those not there with him was, "Thank you, well done." He acknowledged that he and the others had been angry young men, but they had a job to do, and they did it. He said he had known things would get better, and he was glad to see it happen. Captain David Williams attended the ceremony. He was 84 years old. He had retired from the Army as a lieutenant colonel. He had submitted Rivers' Medal of Honor recommendation on November 20th, 1944. He had believed the award would be processed quickly. He had been wrong. It had taken 52 years, 8 months, and 24 days. Williams stood when Rivers' name was called. He saluted as the medal was presented. The ceremony ended at 12:15. Media coverage was extensive. The story appeared in newspapers across the nation. Television networks broadcast footage of the presentation. The belated recognition sparked conversations about racial discrimination in the military. Veterans organizations praised the decision. Civil rights groups noted that justice delayed was justice denied, but acknowledged that recognition was better late than never. The 7 Medals of Honor corrected part of the historical record. They documented that black soldiers had performed with extraordinary valor during World War II. They proved that racial discrimination had prevented proper recognition. They honored men who had waited decades for acknowledgement. But they also raised uncomfortable questions. How many other black soldiers deserved recognition they never received? How many families never knew their loved ones had been denied medals they earned? Vernon Baker lived 13 more years after receiving his Medal of Honor. He became an advocate for recognizing black veterans. He spoke at schools and military ceremonies. He worked with the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. He helped develop educational programs about African American contributions to the war effort. Baker died on July 13, 2010, at age 90. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The 761st Tank Battalion received its Presidential Unit Citation in 1978, 33 years after the war ended. The citation recognized their extraordinary gallantry during 183 days of continuous combat. Veterans of the battalion attended the ceremony. Most were in their 60s and 70s. Many had never received proper recognition for their service. The citation acknowledged what they had known all along. They had been among the best tank units in the European theater. On June 9, 2009, a stretch of Highway 9 running through Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma, was officially named in Rivers' honor. The dedication ceremony took place 65 years after Rivers shipped out for Europe. Local officials, veterans, and family members attended. A highway sign now marks the route where Rivers grew up. Travelers passing through can see his name. Most will never know the full story of why that name appears there. Rivers remains buried at Lorraine American Cemetery in Saint-Avold, France. The cemetery contains over 10,000 American graves from World War II. Rivers' headstone is marked with his name, rank, and unit. It notes his Medal of Honor. Visitors can find his grave in Plot C, row 37, grave 63. He lies among other soldiers who died in the liberation of France. His grave is maintained by the American Battle Monuments Commission. It receives fresh flowers regularly. People still visit to pay their respects. The story of the 761st Tank Battalion has been documented in books and documentaries. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote Brothers in Arms about the battalion's service. The book detailed their training, combat record, and struggle for recognition. Multiple documentary films have examined their contributions. Museums across the United States feature exhibits about the Black Panthers. Their story is taught in schools as part of African American military history. The 7 Medals of Honor awarded in 1997 opened discussions about systematic discrimination in military awards. Researchers began examining other conflicts. In 2000, President Clinton awarded 22 Medals of Honor to Asian American veterans of World War II who had been denied recognition. In 2014, President Barack Obama presented medals to 24 veterans who had been overlooked because of race or religion. The process of correcting historical injustices continues. Rivers' sacrifice reminds us that heroism has no color. He refused evacuation 3 times with a shattered leg because his company needed experienced tank commanders. He fought for 3 days with gangrene spreading through his leg because the mission was not finished. He died providing covering fire so his fellow soldiers could withdraw safely. He did all of this while serving a nation that denied him basic civil rights. The contradiction defines his story. Rivers fought for freedom abroad, while his family faced segregation at home. He commanded tanks for an army that doubted black soldiers could operate machinery. He earned the Medal of Honor in 1944, but did not receive it until 1997. He gave everything for his country. His country took 53 years to acknowledge what he gave. Reuben Rivers gave his life for the men beside him. His country took 53 years to say thank you. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. One click helps push this story to people who have never heard of the 761st. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We dig through old records to find stories the history books left out. Stories about soldiers who bled for a flag that would not honor them back. Leave a comment. Tell us where you are watching from. United States? United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Every like, every share keeps these men from being forgotten. If someone in your family served, tell us. If not, just say hello. Thank you for watching. Rivers held his ground when everything told him to leave. The least we can do is make sure the world knows his name. These men fought for all of us. Help us fight for their memory.